She took his arm, and they walked away together until they reached a perfect thicket of roses. The seat must have been placed there by a poet, for those using it could see nothing but roses. They had bloomed so early that year, it was only the middle of May. Then it seemed to her, poor hapless child, that she drifted into paradise. "This place reminds me of Moore's poems," said Sir Lionel. "There's a bower of roses by Bendemeer's stream." So they talked in the thicket of roses, and neither of them saw the long, sharp thorns beneath. Greetings, friends. My name is Charles Eubanks, and I'd like to welcome you back to the Book Den. At long last, I shall be talking about Beyond Pardon, a book that I promised I would talk about within weeks, and it has been months. I apologize for the lateness of the blog, but things happen in life, and we cannot always control when we're able to do something. This is a life lesson I've been learning through my time fighting diseases, and as St. James says in the book of James, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. You are a mist that appears for a while and vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord is willing, we will live and do this or that. That is the attitude I will be taking from here on out. I will speak of my plans, but not put dates on anything without the qualification of, if the Lord is willing. Because for far too long I've been making promises and have not been able to complete them. But that is not what I am here to talk about, nor what you are here with me today to hear about. Rather, I shall be talking about Beyond Pardon, a book that my grandfather sent home with me about a year and a half ago. He sent a rather copious box of old knickknacks and books, which he had in store and wished to give to my family and me. There were books like Fun with Dick and Jane, Lassie, and Dr. Christian's Office, all historical books and old ones, but none with any particular value or interest to me. But among these was a very old and artistic-looking hardback with the name Beyond Pardon. This is a very good-looking way to decorate a hardback, if you can see that. I'm not sure if you can. But I was interested. Of course, I thought, Beyond Pardon, 'tis a rather foreboding title. I had never heard of this book, and felt both trepidation and intrigue to know the story. After I flipped through the book, I made the presumption that since it looked like a romance, about an affair no less, that this book was, as they say in The Music Man, a smutty book. It has happened several times that my grandfather has incidentally thrown in some inappropriate books in there among those that he has given to us, especially since his basement is like a veritable cavern of random ancient artifacts. I don't even think that he knows what all is kept in there. Anyway, after a while, when in a predicament of not being interested in any of the books that I have had on my shelves, or at least had at that time, I was craving some romance in particular, I took another look at the contents of Beyond Pardon to determine its worthiness as my next read. I was definitely greeted with a very sad, depressing, and unfortunate story of adultery, but I was surprised to find no vulgar language, nor any seedy love-making scenes throughout the book, no matter how far I got into the narrative. I realized that with the very preachy style of the writing, that this was not a book glorifying affairs and adultery, like many others I could name. It was instead a cautionary tale, warning of the dangers and the lethality of emotional adultery, as opposed to physical adultery, which is usually dealt with, and the effect that it has on human relationships and their happiness. The story is rather straightforward in its plot, focusing only on a very narrow series of events and a very, what I call, insular and limited cast of characters. But the book remains interesting as a cautionary tale, first off, and as a mature piece of romantic fiction. But that it's also able to be understood by young audiences. No one wants to see their father go off with some other woman. No matter how young you are, you can understand that pain, and that pain is very thoroughly explored in this book. If you don't like sad stories or tragedy, you will have a hard time getting through this book. It's almost full tragedy, full blown, halfway through. And the other half is kind of on the edge of perilous tragedy all the time. Um, so, just so you know. No matter how dark and gloomy it gets, though, I was interested the whole time. You get really involved in the story and the characters, the empathy that you feel, and the desire for them to come together and everything to work out in the end really drives you to complete it. At least it did for me. Um, and I didn't necessarily love the characters because none of the characters are like particularly lovable, but they're very human. You like them. Um, I just didn't think that they were very relatable in a modern day sense. They all have very their mindsets are very grounded in the late 19th century. The book was written in 1892, um, and you can't really imagine being in part of a society like they were, where everything was about the balls and the types of parties, where high society are introduced to up and coming society, and one of the main characters is the London beauty, as it were. We don't really have that type of thing nowadays. All we have are like actors and actresses that people idolize and think this one is more beautiful than that one. This one is more handsome, but they're not. There isn't really a high society in America, at least, as there was in Great Britain in 1892, and that's what the story is focused on, is how in English society in 1892 in particular, um, well, 80s, all the way from the 60s through the 80s is the time when it was supposed to be set. It's kind of vague, but yeah, it's set in there, and let you know why later, why it's not 1892. Um, but I'll get into that. This story doesn't really have a whole lot more to it that I can actually say out loud. I mean, I could say it out loud, but I don't want to spoil it for you. This book is very, very based on shock value of figuring out as you read the story what is about to happen. Um, and that's where all the impact comes from, are the spoilers. It's based on plot device, twists and turns, and for me to spoil those twists and turns would be to spoil basically the entire enjoyment of the book, other than its writing, which I love. It is my favorite era, the Belle Epoque, and everything from that era has a very poetic, long, flowing narrative storytelling style, um, which is very different from today's writing style. So, what can I say? It's obscure. Like I said, I never heard anything about this book before I read it. I never heard the title, was not even familiar with it, and expected it to be a smutty book. So there was nothing for me to be able to know what it was going to be like before I read it. Uh, so I say that it is obscure because there's very little information also to be found about Beyond Pardon, and its authoress, Charlotte Mary Brom, also known by her pen name Bertha M. Clay. You have heard it said that the rarer the gem, the higher the value, and that's definitely true for this book, I think. The history behind this book is even more interesting due to its mysteriously obscure nature. While searching the web and different libraries, I felt this sense of adventure and discovery because any actual information I could find on it was actually difficult to find and buried in old message boards, university archives, etc. I felt like an actual researcher, made my findings feel really impactful and exciting. But to be honest, it wasn't that hard, actually. It's not that difficult. It just took a long time, and I tired pretty quickly. So, if anybody wants to do some research on Beyond Pardon, you could probably be able to find twice as much information as I did. Nevertheless, I found that Charlotte Brom was born to devout Roman Catholic parents, if you want to know about the author, with the surname of Law, a very cool name, Law. But she graduated from convent schools and a finishing school, which is basically the same as a charm school here in the US, which is also obsolete, but it meant basically that you teach young women how to become graceful and elegant socialites, and given the cultural candor and rights to be introduced into high society later. A type of school which is now completely obsolete, doesn't even exist. How society has fallen. But after that, she became a governess, married Philip Edward Brom in 1963, with whom she had 9 children. 9 children! That is a lot of family to support and feed. Which was made all the worse when Mr. Brom turned out to be a rather irresponsible drunkard type who could not keep a job. Because of this, Mrs. Brom had to try to support the family through her writings, which is... Can you imagine that? I mean, imagine trying to raise a family and scrimping on everything, a family of 11, no less, and trying to support them on the wages you get from being an author. That is a depressing thought, even by today's standards. She was so hard-pressed that ultimately, and very sadly, she died in 1884 at the age of 48, necessitating her children to be put into guardianship, which is basically the same as what we call, the state taking away our children, The book in question, Beyond Pardon, was therefore published posthumously almost a decade after her death, 1892. And even sadder, most of her books were pirated out of the state by literal pirates, seafaring, mercantile thieves, who took the book to America over the open seas, copied it, and she didn't make any money off of those piratings. And that's very sad, and apparently she was prolific. Unfortunately, most of her works have been lost to time and tide, and Beyond Pardon has been out of print since 1961. It was reprinted in 1961 out of the great desire for it to be reprinted. Many people rose up and said, this is a good book, it needs to be reprinted. And so they did, 1961, and that was it. That run was very short and went out quick. And so now you can't even buy or sell it on store shelves. And that means it's not easily accessible to you, the general public. You can't even find it on Amazon. Imagine that. So for Beyond Pardon, physical copies can only be found really in a few private homes, a few university libraries, a certain library in downtown Buffalo, and in the Library of Congress, apparently. If any of you can find a place to read it or buy it online, please link that in the comment section so that this wonderful little entry in literary Victorian history may be appreciated by more people. This, my own copy, is obviously very old, but also very worn, as you can see, which means that it was not kept in good condition. There are books that are hundreds of years old, older than this one, that are in near mint condition. So there's no excuse for a book of only 125 years old to be in this bad of condition. Um, it's frayed. The pages are falling out. There are stains inside. It's in a sorry state of disrepair. But the I don't think that this is actually a first edition. I don't think it's 125 years old. The copyright page has been ripped out of it, making it hard to date. So I am assuming that it is at least that 50, 60 years old, considering that the last printing was in the 60s, but it could be even older. So I have not been able to find this exact edition in any pictures online or anything of their covers, and all the other ones were not nearly so pretty. So just let me get you. I don't know if you can see it. I like it. I'm just gonna talk about that. It's just really pretty. It's got swirlies and some plants on it. It's very nice. It's all stamped. You can feel it. You know, I have a very kinesthetic um, relationship with this book. Look at that. You see that? It's like seals. Anyway, um, yes. So you may stumble across it in some like mom and pop used bookstores or something, but the chances of that are slim. So unfortunately, I can't give you a recommendation on where to find it and read it myself, because I believe that this book should be considered classic by modern audiences as well, and kept in posterity, just as we keep the works of, say, Jane Austen. Um, Now, there are other Bertha M. Clay books that are in print and can be found online, um, but I haven't read them, so I can't recommend them in particular. But she did write Dora Thorne herself, so I think I can safely recommend that one. The interesting thing about the name Bertha M. Clay is that after she died, people took up her pen, so to speak, and continued writing in her name, in the pseudonym that it is, Charlotte M. No, not Charlotte. Bertha M. Clay. They took up that name and continued writing similar works after she died. So even though she wrote hundreds of stories, there are probably hundreds more that are actually in the shelves under that name that are not written by her, because people liked her style so much and the moral ideas that she expounded. So, please look up those books. Look up Dora Thorne, that's the title of the book. But, yeah. I've consistently heard comments about art or literature or books, which imply that the more obscure something is, or the fact that it's been lost to time, means that it's less valuable, that people value it less. And that makes me very angry, because just because something is obscure does not mean that it is not a classic. For example, one of those rare historical tidbits that I hit upon in digging through the dust of the ancients is the fact that Emperor I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, who was working for the rebellion, was the instigator of the rebellion in Ethiopia, the Emperor of Ethiopia, read Beyond Pardon while exiled by the Italian Axis regime in 1936 after Italy invaded Ethiopia. He was exiled, and the Allies took him in, so he spent most of his time in exile reading English books in English gardens. It was there that he read Beyond Pardon and liked it so much that when he returned as emperor in 1941, after Ethiopia was being taken back, he had it translated into Amharic, the official language of Ethiopia, as well as in Tigrinya. I'm not sure if I'm butchering that, and was thereafter widely read throughout Eritrea. I have even come across an individual's personal blog post saying that they and a friend of theirs were trying to get the book translated into Japanese and Chinese and different other languages. And the Japanese one was a post from 2014. So the book has been translated many times into many different languages and is still being translated to this day in other languages, though it be nearly absent from the bookshelves of America the Beautiful. So, I think that in, kind of summing up, getting to how I feel about the book, I think the main thing that recommends it to the reader is the incredible emotional sincerity which comes across from the page as Charlotte herself begs and pleads with the viewer one on one with, I plead with you, reader type thing, that type of language, not to make the same mistakes as did the characters in her book. She sets forth their plight as something of a commonplace occurrence between innocent denizens of the social structure of 19th century England, and she sets the fault squarely on the shoulders of you, the everyday person, the society around people. Um, I think she might say, if she, she didn't use this terminology, but she basically says it takes a village to raise a child, but not raise a child, but to keep a child in the way they should go, to keep that child from falling into adultery and mishap. So, uh, if you should see a young man or woman being seduced into adulterous relationships, um, and you do nothing, who knows how far the consequences of that adultery and that decision will affect the world around it at large. Um, the book is an interesting case study into love and companionship, showing the hypocrisy of the time, and it's still relatable, even though not in the same ways, and the fact that morality is not always as clear cut or black and white as we think it to be. It's all written in a very poetic, rhetorical, expository fashion, which some people might find boring or tedious, and in some parts it actually is. I did have some trouble reading it. The language is so flowery sometimes that it takes a lot of mulling over and, going over in your mind, trying to figure out exactly what the author is meaning. I'm able to read these books very easily, very quickly. Usually, this one took a little more time. So you know that if you're used to modern day books with the quick, choppy sentence structures in order to keep things fast and the show don't tell style of writing that we have these days, you'll have a hard time getting through this book. The, I would say that I prefer this style of writing, of exposition, talking straight to the reader, uh, the poeticism in the prose is even better than show don't tell. It's tell don't show. It does show, there are events, there are story elements. Obviously, it is a story, it is fiction, but the way that it is told is more for an effect that a sermon would have on you than just a story in and of itself. It gives you the story, but it also narrates the story and what you should feel about it as you're going along. Some people might be put off to that idea, and like, in these days, they like to think about what a book means and pick it apart without actually being told what it means so that you can get something out of it yourself and put meaning into it yourself. But this story, it gives you the meaning because that was the point of the author, to give you right and wrong in this particular situation and to show you how to respond to it and what is the godly way to respond to it, because she was definitely a Catholic. So the charm is more in the telling of the story than in the events, and I, for one, find the writing to be far and away more enjoyable than show don't tell. So, I believe that the whole reason why this comes off as sincere and not just as preachy is that the author was part of that English society that she is coming against and was painfully aware of its shortcomings, having gone through tragedies of her own, that she could not help but bring to light those issues in her writing. And for that, I think she deserved more recognition than she was given on this earth. But as I am sure she would say, my reward is in God's eternal heaven. So, in conclusion, I just want to end by reading a short paragraph from her biographer, Gregory Drodst. It's in another page here, so I'm going to bring that up. Okay. And that can also be found on Wikipedia. Once again, it doesn't take a whole lot to find things these days on the internet. But here we go. Her stories appeared in popular weekly publications such as Bow Bells, The London Reader, and The Family Herald. She was incredibly prolific, writing somewhere in the region of 130 novels during her lifetime. Charlotte Brahm's fiction was invariably set in English country houses. Against this milieu, she reworked the theme of love in all of its multifarious aspects: old love, young love, jealousy, suspicion, misalliance, and improvident marriage. High morals such as honor, a sense of duty, and self-sacrifice are lauded as the greatest of virtues. The books also contain a strong descriptive passage, some of which are drawn from her associations with Leicestershire. Her literary endeavors in a male-dominated field, her works of charity, and her personal stamina and resilience in the face of family tragedy and ill health represent a triumph in adversity. I agree, and as someone currently in ill health myself, I can relate to this desire to overcome while yet in the battle, and I hope for myself and all of you experiencing misfortune out there that we may again hope and gain determination through her example. Thank you for watching, and as always, God bless, and seize the book.